Maya Johnson wiped down the last table of her shift at its diner, her feet aching from another 12-hour day. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. At 28, she had been working at this downtown diner for 6 years, ever since dropping out of nursing school to care for her sick mother. The tips weren't great, but they were enough to keep her small apartment and help with her younger brother's college expenses. The bell above the door chimed, signaling a late customer. Maya glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. They officially closed at midnight, so she couldn't turn anyone away. A well-dressed older man in an expensive suit entered, looking somewhat disheveled and nervous. His silver hair was slightly mussed, and his usually pristine appearance seemed off. He chose a corner booth, away from the windows, and kept glancing toward the door. "Coffee, please," he said quietly when Maya approached. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the menu. "And maybe some pie if you have any left." Maya nodded, noting the man's obvious distress. "Apple or cherry? Both are fresh from today." "Apple, thank you." His voice carried a refined accent, different from the usual late-night crowd of truck drivers and shift workers. As Maya poured his coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that she recognized him from somewhere. Perhaps television or the newspaper, though she couldn't place exactly where. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and respect, yet tonight he seemed vulnerable, almost fragile. The man introduced himself simply as Robert and made polite conversation about the weather and the diner's history. Maya learned he was from out of town, in the city for business meetings. He seemed genuinely interested in her stories about the neighborhood and the regular customers who had become like family over the years. "You've been here 6 years?" Robert asked, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "That's quite a commitment. Do you enjoy the work?" Maya paused, considering her answer. Most people didn't really want to hear about the struggles of working multiple jobs or the dreams she had put on hold. "It's honest work," she said finally. "I meet good people and every day is different. Plus, that's the owner. She's been like a second mother to me." Robert nodded, seeming to understand more than she expected. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the most ordinary places. Their conversation was interrupted by the aggressive sound of car doors slamming outside. Through the large windows, Maya could see 2 police cruisers pulling into the parking lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Her stomach tightened with a familiar anxiety. Late-night police visits to the diner usually meant trouble, and as one of the few black employees working the night shift, Maya had learned to be cautious. 2 officers entered, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the quiet diner. Officer Bradley, a man Maya recognized from previous unpleasant encounters, scanned the room with obvious suspicion. His partner, a younger officer named Torres, followed closely behind. "Evening," Officer Bradley said, his tone suggesting this was anything but a social call. His eyes fixed on Robert, who had gone very still in his booth. "We're looking for someone who might have been involved in an incident earlier tonight. Tall, well-dressed man, probably in an expensive suit." Maya felt the tension in the air thicken. Robert's coffee cup rattled slightly as he set it down, and she could see the fear in his eyes. Something was very wrong, but every instinct told her that this man was not dangerous. "What kind of incident?" Maya asked, stepping slightly between the officers and Robert's booth. She kept her voice steady and professional, though her heart was racing. Officer Bradley's expression hardened. "That's police business, miss. We just need to ask this gentleman a few questions." He moved toward Robert's table with obvious intent. "Sir," Officer Torres addressed Robert directly, "we're going to need to see some identification and ask you to come with us for questioning." Robert's hands shook as he reached for his wallet. "Officer, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I haven't done anything wrong. I've been here for the past hour just having coffee and pie." "That's right," Maya interjected firmly. "Mr. Robert has been a customer here all evening. He's been nothing but polite and respectful." Officer Bradley turned his attention to Maya, his expression showing clear irritation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. This doesn't concern you." But Maya could see something in Robert's eyes that reminded her of her own father years ago. A good man caught in circumstances beyond his control, facing a system that presumed guilt before innocence. Her father had been wrongfully arrested during a case of mistaken identity, spending 3 days in jail before the real suspect was found. The experience had shaped Maya's understanding of how quickly life could change when prejudice and assumptions replaced proper investigation. "Actually, it does concern me," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "This is my workplace and Mr. Robert is my customer. If you want to question him, you can do it here where I can witness that he's treated fairly." Officer Bradley's face flushed with anger. "Listen here, girl, you need to know your place. This is police business, and you're interfering with an investigation." The word girl hit Maya like a slap. She had heard that tone too many times, dismissive, demeaning, designed to make her feel small and powerless. But tonight, something inside her refused to back down. Maybe it was the exhaustion from working double shifts for months, or the frustration of watching her community be treated with constant suspicion, or simply the recognition of genuine fear in a fellow human being's eyes. "My place," Maya said slowly, "is standing up for what's right. And what I see right now is two officers harassing a customer who's done nothing wrong except sit quietly and drink coffee." The standoff stretched across the diner like a taut wire. Officer Torres shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond what seemed necessary. Robert sat frozen, caught between his desire to avoid conflict and his growing admiration for this young woman's courage. "Ma'am," Officer Torres said more gently, "we really do just need to ask a few questions. There was a robbery earlier tonight, and the suspect matches this gentleman's general description." Maya's mind raced. A robbery, that explained the tension, but not the immediate assumption of guilt. "What specifically makes you think Mr. Robert was involved? Has anyone identified him? Do you have evidence placing him at the scene?" Officer Bradley stepped forward aggressively. "You don't get to question our methods, Waitress. Now step aside, or you'll be facing charges for obstruction of justice." "Then arrest me," Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Because I'm not moving until you treat this man with the respect every citizen deserves." Robert watched this exchange with growing amazement. Here was someone he had just met, someone who knew nothing about his background or circumstances, willing to risk her own safety to protect him from what she perceived as injustice. It was a display of moral courage he rarely encountered in his usual circles, where people were more concerned with protecting their own interests than standing up for principle. The tension in the diner reached a breaking point as Officer Bradley reached for his handcuffs, clearly intending to make good on his threat. Maya didn't flinch, though every muscle in her body was tense with anticipation. She thought of her mother's strength during her illness, of her brother's determination to succeed in college despite the odds, of all the small acts of courage that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to stand up for others. Officer Torres placed a restraining hand on his partner's arm. "Brad, maybe we should slow down here. Let's just ask the questions and see what we can learn." But Officer Bradley shook him off, his authority challenged and his temper flaring. "No, this has gone too far. If she wants to interfere with police business, she can spend the night in jail thinking about it." As he moved toward Maya with the handcuffs, Robert finally found his voice. "Officer, please. Miss Johnson is only trying to help. She's been nothing but professional and kind. If you need to question me, I'll cooperate fully, but there's no reason to involve her in this." "Miss Johnson, is it?" Officer Bradley sneered. "Seems like you two know each other pretty well for strangers." Maya felt the implication behind his words and the familiar sting of assumptions based on race and class. "We just met tonight," she said firmly. "But that doesn't change the fact that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to protect and serve." The words hung in the air, a challenge to everything Officer Bradley represented. In that moment, Maya realized she had crossed a line from which there might be no return. She had publicly challenged police authority, defended a stranger, and refused to be intimidated. Whatever happened next would change her life forever. Robert watched Maya's face and saw something that moved him deeply, not just courage, but a fundamental belief in justice that seemed unshakable despite the personal cost she might pay. In his world of corporate boardrooms and political maneuvering, such pure moral conviction was rare and precious. Officer Torres looked between his partner and Maya, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had developed. "Look, maybe we can all take a step back here. Nobody needs to get arrested tonight if we can just have a civil conversation." But Officer Bradley was beyond reason, his authority challenged and his prejudices inflamed. "No, she made her choice. She wants to be a hero, she can face the consequences." As he reached for Maya's arm, time seemed to slow. Maya stood her ground, her chin raised slightly, refusing to show the fear that was coursing through her. This was the moment that would define her not just as a waitress or a daughter or a sister, but as a person willing to stand up for what she believed was right, regardless of the cost. Robert made a decision that would surprise everyone in the diner, including himself. Rising from his booth with sudden authority, his voice took on a commanding tone that neither officer could ignore. The authority in Robert's voice brought an immediate halt to the escalating confrontation. Both officers turned toward him, something in his bearing commanding their attention in a way that transcended the simple dynamics of customer and law enforcement. Maya noticed the subtle change in his posture, the way he seemed to transform from a nervous, frightened man into someone accustomed to being heard and respected. "I am Robert Harrison," he said clearly, reaching into his jacket pocket with deliberate, visible movements. He a leather wallet and removed several cards. "CEO of Harrison Industries. Here is my identification, my business cards, and my personal attorney's direct number." The name hit Officer Torres first, his eyes widening with recognition. Harrison Industries was one of the city's largest employers, a multinational corporation with significant political and economic influence. Officer Bradley, however, seemed skeptical, examining the identification cards with obvious suspicion. "Anyone can fake business cards," Bradley muttered, though his voice had lost some of its earlier aggression. Robert remained calm, his demeanor professional but firm. "Officer Torres, I believe you can verify my identity through your dispatch if necessary. I'm also listed in the city's business directory, and my photograph appears regularly in the business section of the local newspaper." He paused, allowing this information to settle. "Now, regarding this alleged robbery, I've been in meetings with city council members and business leaders all evening, followed by dinner at the Metropolitan Club. I have dozens of witnesses who can verify my whereabouts." Maya watched this transformation with amazement. The nervous, vulnerable man she had been protecting was revealing himself to be one of the most powerful people in the city. Yet her initial instinct to help him hadn't changed. If anything, she was more convinced that her intervention had been necessary. Wealth and status shouldn't be required for fair treatment by law enforcement. Officer Torres was clearly recognizing the implications of the situation. "Mr. Harrison, we weren't specifically looking for you. We're investigating an armed robbery that occurred around 9 p.m. at the jewelry store on 5th Street. The suspect was described as a well-dressed white male in his 50s or 60s. "I understand," Robert replied, "and I appreciate your diligence in investigating the crime. However, I hope you can also understand why Miss Johnson's concern for fair treatment resonates with me. She had no idea who I was, yet she was willing to stand up for basic principles of justice and human dignity." Officer Bradley's face was red with embarrassment and anger. He had been moments away from arresting one of the city's most influential citizens, and worse, he had done so while treating a brave young woman with obvious disrespect. "Sir, we were just doing our job, following up on leads." "Your job," Maya interjected quietly, finding her voice again, "is to protect and serve all citizens equally, regardless of their race, gender, or economic status." The adrenaline was still coursing through her, but her fear was transforming into something else, a clarity about what she had just experienced and what it meant. Robert turned to Maya, his expression showing deep respect and gratitude. "Miss Johnson, what you did tonight took tremendous courage. You stood up for someone you didn't know, against authority figures who could have made your life very difficult. That kind of moral bravery is rare and should be commended, not punished." Officer Torres nodded in agreement. "Ma'am, you were right to speak up. Everyone deserves fair treatment." He shot a meaningful look at his partner. "We should have been more professional in our approach." Officer Bradley remained silent, clearly struggling with the reversal of the situation. His assumptions about power, authority, and social dynamics had been challenged in a way that left him visibly uncomfortable. Robert continued, "Officers, I hope this incident can serve as a learning opportunity. Miss Johnson demonstrated the kind of community spirit and personal integrity that makes our city stronger. I trust that your department's future interactions with citizens will reflect the professionalism and respect that people like her deserve." Maya felt a mixture of emotions washing over her relief that the immediate crisis was over, pride in her decision to stand up for what was right, and curiosity about this man whose life she had unknowingly protected. But she also felt the weight of what had just happened. She had publicly confronted police officers, something that could have serious consequences for someone in her position. Mr. Harrison, she said carefully, I'm glad this worked out, but I want you to know that I didn't help you because of who you are. I would have done the same thing for anyone being treated unfairly. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all evening. I believe that completely, Miss Johnson, and that's exactly why what you did was so remarkable. Officer Torres closed his notepad and looked apologetically at both Robert and Maya. Again, I apologize for how this situation developed. We'll continue investigating the robbery through proper channels. He paused, then added, and thank you, Miss Johnson, for reminding us of the standards we should always maintain. As the officers prepared to leave, Officer Bradley finally spoke, his voice strained. Sir, ma'am, I will be more careful in our approach going forward. After the police left, the diner fell into a heavy silence. Maya began clearing tables, her hands shaking slightly as the full impact of what had happened began to sink in. Robert remained in his booth, watching her work with obvious admiration. Miss Johnson, he said finally, could you spare a few more minutes? I'd like to talk with you if you don't mind. Maya nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee and joining him at his table. The normal customer-server dynamic had been completely transformed by the evening's events. First, Robert said, I need to thank you properly. What you did tonight went far beyond customer service or even basic human decency. You risked your job, your safety, and potentially your freedom to stand up for a stranger. Why? Maya considered the question seriously. My father always taught me that you judge a society by how it treats its most vulnerable members. Tonight, you looked vulnerable, regardless of who you turned out to be. And those officers were treating you as guilty until proven innocent, which isn't how justice is supposed to work. Robert nodded slowly. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Maya said quietly. He died 3 years ago, but he always said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. He'd be proud of you tonight. Maya felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I hope so, though I'm not sure what's going to happen to me now. Word travels fast in this neighborhood, and challenging police officers isn't exactly a career-building move for someone like me. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. Miss Johnson, I want to be very clear about something. What happened tonight should not have negative consequences for you. In fact, quite the opposite. Your actions demonstrated leadership, integrity, and moral courage qualities that are desperately needed in many areas of our community. Maya wasn't sure how to respond to that. In her experience, doing the right thing often came with a cost, especially for people without power or influence. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate the sentiment, but people like me don't usually get rewarded for standing up to authority. We get labeled as troublemakers. Not this time, Robert said firmly. I give you my word on that. They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their very different lives and backgrounds. Maya learned that Robert had grown up in a working-class family and had built his business empire through decades of hard work and calculated risks. Robert learned about Maya's dreams of returning to nursing school, her dedication to her family, and her deep connection to the neighborhood where she had lived her entire life. You mentioned wanting to finish nursing school, Robert said as Maya finally began closing up the diner. What stopped you? Maya hesitated, then decided that after the evening they had shared, honesty was the only appropriate response. Money, mainly. When my mother got sick, I had to drop out to work full-time and help with her care. After she died, there were debts to pay and my brother's education to help with. Every time I save enough to think about going back, something else comes up. Robert nodded thoughtfully. And you've been working here ever since? Here and at a grocery store on weekends, Maya confirmed. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me help my brother stay in college. He's studying engineering and maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Your family is fortunate to have someone so dedicated to their, Robert observed. As Maya finished her closing duties, Robert remained at his table, apparently lost in thought. Finally, as she was about to lock up, he stood and approached her. Miss Johnson, I know this is going to sound strange, but tonight changed something for me. Meeting you, seeing your courage and integrity, it reminded me of why I went into business in the first place. Not just to make money, but to make a positive impact on people's lives. Maya wasn't sure where this was leading, but she could sense that Robert was building up to something important. I'd like to do something for you, he continued. Something that recognizes not just what you did tonight, but who you are as a person. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow to discuss some possibilities? Maya felt a mix of curiosity and wariness. In her experience, wealthy people's promises often didn't translate into meaningful action once the emotional impact of a moment had faded. "Mr. Harrison, you don't owe me anything. I just did what felt right." "I know," Robert said. "That's exactly why I want to do this. Will you at least consider it?" Maya looked into his eyes and saw genuine sincerity. After the events of the evening, she felt she owed him at least the courtesy of listening to what he had to say. "All right," she agreed, "but I work tomorrow night, so it would have to be during the day." Robert smiled broadly. "Perfect. Would 2 p.m. work? We could meet at my office downtown, or if you're more comfortable, somewhere more neutral." "Your office is fine," Maya said, though she wondered what she was getting herself into. As Robert prepared to leave, he turned back one more time. "Miss Johnson, Maya, may I call you Maya? What you did tonight mattered more than you know. Sometimes a single act of courage can change more lives than we ever imagine." After he left, Maya finished closing the diner in a daze. The evening felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. She had gone from a routine late shift to confronting police officers to discovering she had protected one of the city's most powerful men. But the part that stayed with her as she walked to her car wasn't the revelation of Robert's identity. It was the moment when she had decided to stand up for what she believed was right, regardless of the consequences. As she drove home through the empty streets, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a dramatic turn. What that turn would lead to, she had no idea, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had truly stood for something that mattered. The next morning would bring new challenges and unexpected opportunities, but tonight had proven to Maya that she was stronger and braver than she had ever imagined. Whatever happened next, she knew she could face it with the same courage that had carried her through the most intense hour of her life. Maya spent most of the next morning second-guessing her decision to meet with Robert Harrison. She had barely slept, replaying the events at the diner over and over in her mind. By daylight, the whole encounter seemed almost dreamlike. Had she really stood up to police officers? Had she really spent an hour talking with one of the city's wealthiest and most influential people? She changed clothes 3 times before settling on her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit she had worn to her mother's funeral and her brother's high school graduation. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean and professional. As she rode the bus downtown toward Harrison Industries headquarters, Maya felt increasingly out of place among the suited heading to their offices. The Harrison Industries building was a gleaming 40-story tower that dominated several city blocks. Maya had passed it countless times, but never imagined she would actually enter it. The lobby was all marble and glass, with security guards and well-dressed people moving purposefully in all directions. She felt like she was entering a different world entirely. After checking in at the security desk, Maya was escorted to the executive floor by a friendly assistant named Jennifer. The elevator ride to the 38th floor gave her a stunning view of the city she had lived in all her life, but had never seen from this perspective. "Mr. Harrison is looking forward to meeting with you," Jennifer said as they walked down a corridor lined with original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows. "He's cleared his entire afternoon, which is quite unusual for him." Maya wondered what that meant. Was this meeting more important than she had realized? Robert's office was larger than Maya's entire apartment. One wall was entirely windows offering a panoramic view of the city, while the others displayed awards, photographs with political leaders, and what appeared to be expensive original paintings. Despite the obvious wealth on display, the office felt warm and personal rather than intimidating. Robert stood when she entered, coming around his massive desk to greet her with a warm smile. He was dressed casually for him, in slacks and a button-down shirt without a tie. "Maya, thank you so much for coming. Please have a seat wherever you're comfortable." Maya chose one of the leather chairs facing his desk, noting that Robert sat in the chair next to her rather than behind his desk. It was a small gesture that put her more at ease. "First," Robert began, "I want you to know that I've spent most of the morning thinking about our conversation last night. What you shared about your family, your goals, your dedication to your community, it really impressed me." Maya nodded politely, still unsure where this was leading. "I also want you to know that I've made some calls this morning to ensure that your actions last night won't result in any negative consequences for you." I spoke with the police chief personally, and he assured me that Officers Bradley and Torres will face appropriate review of their conduct. Officer Torres, in particular, expressed his respect for your courage. This was news to Maya. She had assumed that challenging police officers would inevitably lead to problems down the road, being pulled over more frequently, scrutinized more carefully, or simply becoming known as a troublemaker in law enforcement circles. I appreciate that, she said carefully, though I hope you understand that I didn't help you last night expecting anything in return. I know that completely, Robert replied, and that's exactly why I want to talk with you about something that could be beneficial for both of us and for this city. He stood and walked to his window, looking out over the sprawling urban landscape below. Maya, I've been successful in business for over 30 years. I've made more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, and I've been involved in numerous philanthropic endeavors. But last night reminded me of something I had lost sight of, the importance of individual courage and moral leadership. Maya listened intently, trying to understand what he was building toward. Harrison Industries employs over 50,000 people in this region, Robert continued. We have contracts with dozens of community organizations, fund numerous educational programs, and contribute millions of dollars annually to local charities. But I realized last night that we've been missing something crucial in all of that effort. He turned back to face her directly. We've been operating from the top down, making decisions about what communities need without having anyone with authentic community connections involved in those decisions. We've been well-intentioned, but potentially out of touch. Maya began to sense where this conversation might be heading, and it made her both excited and nervous. What I'd like to propose, Robert said, is offering you a position with Harrison Industries as our Director of Community Relations and Social Impact. This would be a newly created position with significant authority and resources. Your job would be to ensure that our community investments are actually meeting community needs and to help us identify new ways to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. She had expected perhaps a small gesture of gratitude, maybe help with a scholarship application or a letter of recommendation. She had not expected a job offer, especially not for a position that sounded both important and well beyond her current qualifications. Mr. Harrison, she said slowly, I'm honored by the offer, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that. I don't have a business degree or corporate experience. I'm a waitress who dropped out of nursing school. Robert smiled warmly. Maya, you're exactly qualified for this position, just not in the traditional way. Last night, you demonstrated leadership, moral courage, and the ability to stand up for your principles under pressure. Those are qualities that can't be taught in business school. Everything else, the administrative skills, the knowledge of corporate procedures, the understanding of budgets and programs, those things can be learned. Maya's mind raced. A job like this would change everything for her and her family. She could finally afford to go back to school, help her brother graduate without debt, and stop working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. But it seemed too good to be true. What would the position actually involve? She asked. Robert moved to his desk and picked up a folder he had apparently prepared in advance. We're talking about a starting salary of $90,000 annually, with full benefits including health insurance, dental, vision, and an education reimbursement program that would pay for you to complete your nursing degree or pursue any other educational goals you have. Maya felt dizzy. $90,000 was more than she currently made in 2 years at both of her jobs combined. The position would involve evaluating our current community programs, meeting with neighborhood leaders and organization heads, identifying unmet needs, and developing new initiatives to address those needs. You'd have a budget of several $1,000,000 to work with, along with a small staff to help implement programs. He handed her the folder. This contains a more detailed job description, information about our current community programs, and some preliminary ideas about areas where we think we could make a bigger impact. Maya opened the folder and scanned the contents. The scope of the position was enormous, everything from education initiatives to small business development to healthcare access programs. It was exactly the kind of work she had always dreamed of doing, but had never imagined she could access without years of additional education and experience. Mr. Harrison, she said, looking up from the documents, This is incredible, but I have to ask, are you offering me this position because of what happened last night? Because if so, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want charity disguised as employment. Robert's expression became serious. Maya, let me be completely honest with you. Yes, meeting you last night was the catalyst for creating this position, but not because I feel I owe you something. It's because you demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking and character we need to make our community programs more effective. He sat back down across from her. For years, we've been funding programs designed by people who don't live in the communities we're trying to serve. We've been making assumptions about what people need instead of asking them directly. We've been measuring success by how much money we spend rather than by how many lives we actually improve. Maya nodded, understanding the problem he was describing. She had seen numerous well-intended programs fail in her neighborhood because they addressed symptoms rather than root causes, or because they were designed without input from the people they were meant to help. What you showed me last night, Robert continued, is someone who understands both individual dignity and community dynamics. Someone who's willing to take risks for principle, but who also understands practical consequences. Someone who's lived the reality of economic struggle, but who hasn't become cynical or bitter about it. Maya felt a mixture of pride and uncertainty. But what if I fail? What if I take this job and it turns out I really am in over my head? Then you'll learn and adapt, just like anyone else in a challenging new role, Robert replied. I didn't become CEO of this company because I knew everything from the beginning. I got here by being willing to take on responsibilities that stretched my abilities, and by surrounding myself with people who could teach me what I needed to know. He leaned forward slightly. Maya, I'm not offering you this job because I think you can do it perfectly from day one. I'm offering it to you because I believe you have the character and intelligence to grow into it, and because your perspective is exactly what we need to do better work in the community. Maya looked again at the job description, trying to imagine herself in conference rooms and community meetings, managing budgets and coordinating with nonprofit organizations. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Could I think about it? She asked. This is a huge decision, and I'd like to talk it over with my brother. Of course, Robert said. Take as much time as you need, though I hope you know that I'm completely serious about this offer. This isn't a publicity stunt or a moment of emotional generosity. This is a business decision based on what I believe will make our company and our community stronger. Maya stood to leave, still holding the folder of information. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you something? Why is this so important to you? You could hire someone with years of experience in community development or nonprofit management. Why take a chance on someone like me? Robert was quiet for a moment, then walked back to the window overlooking the city. Because someone like you is exactly who we need. People with traditional qualifications in this field often think in traditional ways. They follow established models and conventional wisdom. But the problems we're trying to solve, poverty, educational inequality, lack of opportunity, those problems persist partly because traditional approaches haven't been enough. He turned back to her. What happened last night wasn't just about you standing up to police officers, though that was remarkable. It was about you seeing an injustice and refusing to accept it, even when doing so could have cost you significantly. That's the kind of thinking we need applied to community challenges. Maya felt a surge of possibility that she hadn't experienced in years. Since her mother's death and her decision to leave nursing school, she had focused on survival rather than dreams. This offer represented a chance to do meaningful work while also securing her family's future. I'll have an answer for you by tomorrow, she promised. Perfect, Robert said, walking her to his office door. And Maya, whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you has already made a difference in how I think about the responsibility that comes with success. So thank you for that. As Maya rode the elevator back down to the lobby, her mind was spinning with possibilities and concerns. This opportunity could transform not just her life, but potentially the lives of countless people in her community. But it also represented a leap into a world she had never imagined herself in, with responsibilities she had never trained for. The bus ride back to her neighborhood gave her time to process what had just happened. She looked out the window at the streets where she had grown up, the corner stores and small houses and community centers that had shaped her understanding of both struggle and resilience. Could she really bridge the gap between that world and the marble and glass towers of corporate philanthropy? By the time she reached her apartment, Maya had made her decision. But first, she needed to call her brother. Maya's brother was in the middle of studying for his thermodynamics exam when his phone rang. As a junior engineering student at the state university, he rarely had time for long conversations, but the excitement in Maya's voice told him this call was different. "I need to tell you something incredible that happened, but you have to promise to let me get through the whole story before you start asking questions," Maya said, packing around her small living room. "Okay, you're kind of freaking me out, but go ahead," replied, closing his textbook and giving his sister his full attention. Maya told him everything: the encounter at the diner, the police confrontation, Robert's revelation of his identity, and finally the job offer that seemed too good to be true. When she finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, I'm just—" "Maya, this is insane. You're telling me that you stood up to cops to protect some random guy, and it turns out he's Robert Harrison. And now he wants to give you a job that pays more than Dad ever made." "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Maya confirmed. "And I wanted to talk it through with you because this decision affects both of us. If I take this job, I can help you graduate without the student loans we've been worried about." Was quiet again, processing the implications. "Maya, that would be amazing, but you can't make a career decision based on what's best for me. What do you actually want to do?" It was a question Maya had been asking herself since leaving Robert's office. "I think I want to take it," she said slowly. "Not just because of the money, though that would solve a lot of problems, but because it sounds like work I could actually care about, work that could make a real difference." "But are you worried about being in over your head?" asked gently. "I mean, going from waitressing to running community programs for a major corporation, that's a huge jump." Maya sat down on her worn couch, looking around the apartment she had called home for 6 years. "Of course I'm scared, but you know what? I've been scared before. I was scared when Mom got sick and I had to drop out of school. I was scared when she died and I thought we might lose the apartment. I was scared when you started college and I wasn't sure we could afford it." "And you handled all of those things," pointed out. "Exactly. And last night I was scared when those officers were treating Mr. Harrison unfairly, but I did what felt right anyway. Maybe that's what this is, another time when I need to do what feels right even though it's scary." Was proud of his sister, though not surprised by her courage. He had watched her sacrifice her own dreams to take care of their family after their father's death and their mother's illness. She had worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat while somehow maintaining an optimism and kindness that inspired everyone around her. "You know what I think," said finally. "I think you should take the job, not because of the money and not because it would help me, but because you've spent the last 6 years taking care of everyone else. It's time for you to take care of yourself and your own dreams." "But what if I mess it up?" Maya asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then you'll figure it out and do better," replied. "Maya, you've been solving problems and helping people your whole life. This is just doing it on a bigger scale with better resources." After talking with for another hour, Maya felt more confident about her decision. She called the diner and spoke with Mrs., explaining that she might be leaving for a new opportunity. Mrs., who had become like a mother to Maya over the years, was thrilled for her. "You've been like family to me, and I hate to lose you," Mrs. said. "But you deserve something better than working double shifts just to pay rent. If this man sees your worth and wants to give you a chance to use your talents, you take it." The next morning, Maya called Robert's office and accepted the position. Within a week, her life had completely transformed. She gave notice at both the diner and the grocery store, found a new apartment in a safer neighborhood, and began what Robert called her transition period. 3 weeks of intensive preparation before officially starting her new role. Robert had arranged for Maya to spend time with various department heads, learning about Harrison Industries' current community programs and understanding how corporate philanthropy operated. She met with the legal department to understand compliance requirements, with the finance team to learn about budget management, and with the public relations department to understand how community initiatives related to the company's broader mission. The learning curve was steep, but Maya discovered that her years of managing multiple jobs, dealing with difficult customers, and navigating complex family and neighborhood dynamics had given her skills that translated well to the corporate world. She was naturally good at listening to people, identifying problems, and finding practical solutions. Her first major challenge came during her second week of preparation. Robert had arranged for her to attend a meeting of the City Community Development Council, where representatives from various nonprofits, government agencies, and corporations discussed coordinating their efforts to address urban poverty. Maya walked into the conference room feeling nervous but determined. She was the only black woman in a room of mostly older white men in expensive suits. Several attendees clearly wondered who she was and why she was there. The meeting was led by Jonathan, director of the city's largest charitable foundation, and someone Maya quickly realized was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He was discussing a proposal for a new job training program when Maya raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'm Maya Johnson from Harrison Industries. Could you tell me more about how this program would actually reach the people who need it most?" Looked slightly annoyed at being interrupted. "Well, we would work through the established unemployment office and community college system to identify candidates." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense from an administrative perspective, but I'm wondering about the people who might not be connected to those systems. In my neighborhood, for example, there are a lot of folks who would benefit from job training, but who don't necessarily interact with government agencies or educational institutions regularly." "I'm sure the standard outreach methods would be adequate," replied dismissively. Maya felt a familiar feeling, the same dismissiveness she had encountered from Officer Bradley, the assumption that her perspective wasn't valuable because of who she was or where she came from. But this time, she was representing Harrison Industries, and she had both the authority and responsibility to push back. "With respect, mister, I think we might be able to reach more people if we also worked through churches, barber shops, community centers, and other informal networks, where people actually gather and trust the recommendations they receive." Another council member, Sarah from the mayor's office, looked interested. "That's an interesting point. Do you have suggestions for specific organizations we should connect with?" Maya was ready for this question. She had spent her preparation weeks not just learning about corporate procedures, but also reaching out to community leaders she had known for years, asking them about the gaps they saw in current services and programs. "Actually, yes," Maya replied, pulling out a notebook. "I've been talking with leaders from 15 different neighborhood organizations, and they've identified several areas where current programs aren't reaching the people who need them most." For the next 20 minutes, Maya shared insights that came directly from her conversations with pastors, community center directors, small business owners, and neighborhood activists. She talked about transportation barriers that prevented people from accessing downtown services, about issues that made it difficult for single parents to participate in training programs, and about the importance of having program staff who looked like and understood the communities they were trying to serve. The room grew increasingly quiet as Maya spoke, and she could see that several council members were taking notes. When she finished, Sarah was the first to respond. "Ms. Johnson, this is exactly the kind of community input we need to make these programs more effective. Would you be willing to share your contact list and help us develop a more comprehensive outreach strategy?" "Absolutely," Maya replied. "That's exactly why I'm here." After the meeting, several council members approached Maya to continue the conversation. Jonathan, however, seemed less pleased. As Maya was gathering her materials, he approached her with a forced smile. "Ms. Johnson, you certainly brought an interesting perspective to today's discussion. I hope you understand that these programs require a certain level of administrative sophistication to be successful." Maya met his gaze directly. "Mister, I absolutely understand the importance of proper administration, but I also understand that the most sophisticated program in the world won't succeed if it doesn't actually reach and serve the people it's designed to help." "Of course," replied, though his tone suggested he viewed Maya as naive about the complexities of large-scale social programs. As Maya left the meeting, she realized she had just encountered the first significant challenge of her new role. There would be people in the philanthropic and government worlds who would view her as an outsider, who would assume that her lack of traditional credentials meant she didn't understand how things really worked. Some of that skepticism might be based on legitimate concerns about her experience, but she suspected that some of it was also based on assumptions about her race, gender, and background. The thought was intimidating, but it also strengthened Maya's resolve. She had been hired specifically to bring a different perspective to community development work. If everyone was comfortable with her approach, she probably wasn't pushing hard enough to create real change. That evening, Maya called Robert to debrief about the meeting. She told him about the positive reception her ideas had received from most council members, but also about the subtle resistance she had encountered. "Maya," Robert said, "what you experienced today is exactly why this position was necessary. There are people in the philanthropic world who have been doing things the same way for decades, and they're not necessarily eager to hear that their approaches might need to change." "So how do I handle that?" Maya asked. "By staying focused on results," Robert replied. "The best way to overcome skepticism about your qualifications is to demonstrate success. Show them that your community-based approach produces better outcomes than traditional methods, and the criticism will fade away." Maya felt encouraged by Robert's confidence in her, but she also understood that she was entering a world where she would constantly need to prove herself. The difference now was that she had the resources and institutional support to actually test her ideas and demonstrate their value. Over the following week, Maya continued her preparation by visiting Harrison Industries' existing community programs. She spent time at the computer lab the company had funded at a local high school, observed a financial literacy workshop they sponsored at a community center, and attended a small business development meeting they supported. What she found was programs that were well-intentioned and professionally administered, but that often struggled to attract and retain participants. The computer lab was beautifully equipped, but underutilized because students weren't sure how the skills they learned there connected to actual job opportunities. The financial literacy workshops were informative, but poorly attended because they were scheduled during times when working people couldn't participate. The small business development program provided excellent resources, but was intimidating to potential entrepreneurs who felt out of place in the formal business environment. Maya began developing ideas for how these programs could be modified to be more accessible and effective. She wasn't critical of the existing efforts. She could see that everyone involved was trying to make a positive difference. But she also saw opportunities to build bridges between the resources that existed and the communities that needed them. By the end of her third week of preparation, Maya felt ready to begin her official role as Director of Community Relations and Social Impact. She had learned about corporate procedures and philanthropic best practices, but more importantly, she had confirmed her belief that her community-based perspective could add real value to Harrison Industries' efforts. On her last day before officially starting, Robert took Maya to lunch at the same diner where they had first met. Mrs. greeted them both warmly, and Maya could see the pride in her former boss's eyes. "You know," Robert said as they sat in the same booth where he had once waited nervously for the police to leave, "I keep thinking about what you said that night about judging a society by how it treats its most vulnerable members. I think that principle applies just as much to how corporations engage with their communities." Maya smiled, remembering the woman she had been just 3 weeks earlier tired from a double shift, concerned about making rent, focused primarily on day-to-day survival. That woman seemed like a different person now, though Maya was determined not to lose the perspective and values that had brought her to this opportunity. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I want you to know that I take this responsibility very seriously. Not just the job, but the chance to prove that people like me, people from communities that usually don't get heard in corporate boardrooms, can contribute meaningfully to solving social problems." "Maya," Robert replied, "I have complete confidence that you're going to exceed every expectation. But more than that, I think you're going to change how this company and this city think about community engagement." As Maya prepared to begin the most challenging and meaningful work of her life, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From protecting a stranger in a diner to sitting in corporate conference rooms, from working multiple minimum-wage jobs to managing million-dollar community development budgets. It all stemmed from a single decision to stand up for what she believed was right, regardless of the personal cost. Now she was ready to apply that same courage and principle to challenges that could affect thousands of lives. The work would be difficult, and she would face skepticism and resistance from people who doubted her qualifications 6 months into her role as Director of Community Relations and Social Impact. Maya stood before the Harrison Industries Board of Directors, preparing to present the results of her first major initiative. The polished conference room on the 42nd floor was a far cry from the diner where her journey had begun. but Maya had learned to navigate corporate environments while staying true to her community roots. "Ladies and," she began, her voice steady and confident, "I'm here to share the outcomes of our pilot program for community-based workforce development, which we launched in 3 neighborhoods with historically high unemployment rates." The board members, most of whom had initially been skeptical of Robert's decision to hire someone without traditional credentials, leaned forward with genuine interest. Over the past months, Maya had gradually earned their respect by demonstrating that her unconventional background was actually an asset in understanding and solving community challenges. 6 months ago, these 3 neighborhoods had a combined unemployment rate of 32% among adults aged 18 to 45. Through partnerships with local churches, barbershops, community centers, and informal networks, we were able to identify and recruit participants who had never engaged with traditional job training programs. Maya clicked to her next slide, showing before and after statistics that told a remarkable story. Today, 87% of our program participants are employed, with an average wage increase of 45% compared to their previous earnings. More importantly, these jobs are sustainable because we focused on skills training that connected directly to employment opportunities with local businesses who committed to hiring program graduates. Board member, who had been one of Maya's earliest skeptics, raised her hand. "Ms. Johnson, these results are impressive, but can you help us understand what you did differently that produced better outcomes than traditional programs?" Maya had anticipated this question and was ready with a comprehensive answer. There were several key differences. First, we brought the services to the communities instead of requiring people to travel downtown. We held training sessions in church basements, community center conference rooms, and even in barbershops after hours. This eliminated transportation and barriers that often prevent participation. She moved to the next slide, which showed photos from various program locations. Second, we hired instructors and coordinators who lived in these communities and understood the specific challenges participants faced. When someone missed a session because their car broke down, our staff helped them find alternative transportation. When someone struggled with basic literacy skills, we connected them with tutoring resources. We treated participants as whole people, not just potential workers. Robert watched Maya's presentation with obvious pride, but also with amazement at how she had evolved in just 6 months. The nervous waitress who had stood up to police officers had become a confident leader who could speak fluently about program metrics, budget allocations, and strategic partnerships while never losing sight of the human element that made her work effective. Third, Maya continued, we worked directly with local businesses to understand their actual hearing needs rather than assuming we knew what skills were in demand. We discovered that many employers were willing to provide on-the-job training for basic positions if workers demonstrated reliability, communication skills, and a willingness to learn. So we focused our training on those foundational qualities while providing specific technical skills training for higher-level positions. Board member David, who oversaw Harrison Industries' financial operations, looked impressed. What was the total cost per participant compared to traditional programs? Our cost per participant was actually 23% lower than comparable programs, primarily because we leveraged existing community resources and relationships rather than building new infrastructure, Maya replied. Local churches provided meeting space at no cost, community volunteers helped with during sessions, and neighborhood business owners served as mentors and eventual employers. Maya could see that she had the board's full attention. These were people who understood both social impact and financial efficiency, and her program had delivered on both fronts. But the most important difference, Maya said, shifting to a more personal tone, was that we treated participants as partners in designing the program rather than passive recipients of services. We asked them what barriers they faced, what skills they wanted to develop, and what kinds of jobs would allow them to support their families while contributing to their communities. She shared the story of Williams, a single mother who had been unemployed for 8 months before joining the program. Told us that previous job training programs had focused on skills for jobs that required her to work nights and weekends, making it impossible to care for her children. Through our program, she received training in office administration and computer skills, and is now working as a coordinator at a medical clinic with hours that allow her to be home when her kids get out of school. Maya clicked to a photo of at her graduation ceremony, surrounded by her children and community supporters. now earns enough to move her family out of subsidized housing, and she's enrolled in night classes to become a medical assistant. But equally important, she's become a mentor for other women in the program, sharing her experience and helping them navigate challenges. The room was quiet as board members absorbed the implications of what Maya was describing. This wasn't just job training. It was community transformation that addressed root causes of poverty rather than just symptoms. Jonathan, the charitable foundation director who had initially dismissed Maya's ideas, had been invited to observe the board presentation. He raised his hand with obvious reluctance. "Ms. Johnson, these results are certainly encouraging, but how do we know this model can be scaled effectively? Working intimately with 3 neighborhoods is very different from implementing citywide programs." Maya had expected this challenge from, and she was ready with a thorough response. "Mister, you're absolutely right that scaling requires careful planning. But over the past 6 months, leaders from 12 other neighborhoods have approached us asking to replicate the program in their communities. We've learned that the model is actually quite scalable because it builds on existing community assets rather than requiring us to create new infrastructure everywhere." She moved to her final slides, which outlined a 3-year expansion plan. "We propose launching the program in 6 additional neighborhoods next year, with each new site mentored by graduates from our pilot communities. This peer-to-peer support model ensures that we maintain the community-based approach while expanding our reach." Robert had remained quiet during the presentation, but now he spoke up. "The board should also know that Maya's success with workforce development has attracted attention from the mayor's office, the State Department of Labor, and several other major corporations. We've been asked to share our model with other cities facing similar challenges." Maya felt a surge of pride, but also responsibility. What had started as a chance to prove herself had become something much larger, a demonstration that community-based approaches to social problems could produce better results than traditional top-down programs. After the board voted unanimously to expand Maya's program and increase her department's budget by 40%, she found herself alone with Robert in his office. "Maya," he said, "I have something to tell you that I think you'll find interesting. Do you remember Officer Torres, the police officer from that night at the diner?" Maya nodded, wondering where this was leading. "He called me last week. It turns out that he's been following your work through newspaper articles and community meetings. He wanted to tell me that our encounter that night changed how he thinks about community policing." Robert smiled. "He's actually enrolled in a criminal justice graduate program focusing on community relations. He said meeting you made him realize that real police work should be about building relationships and understanding community needs, not just enforcing laws." Maya was amazed. "I had no idea that night had any impact beyond just that moment." "That's the thing about moral courage," Robert replied. "You never know how far the ripple effects will reach. Your decision to stand up for what was right that night didn't just protect me. It started a chain of events that has now affected thousands of lives through your work here, and apparently influenced at least one police officer to rethink his approach to community service." Maya looked out the window at the city sprawling below, thinking about all the people in those neighborhoods who were working multiple jobs, struggling to make ends meet, dreaming of better opportunities for themselves and their families. 6 months ago, she had been one of them. Now she was in a position to create pathways for others to achieve their own transformations. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I want to ask you something. That night at the diner when you decided to reveal who you were and protect me from consequences, what made you do that? You could have just paid your bill and left." Robert considered the question carefully. "You know, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I think it was because you reminded me of why I went into business in the first place. Not just to make money, but to solve problems and create opportunities for people. Watching you stand up for a stranger, risking your own safety for principle, it reminded me that real leadership isn't about having power, it's about using whatever power you have to make things better for others." Maya nodded, understanding something important about the relationship between individual courage and systemic change. "I think what we've both learned is that one person's decision to do the right thing can create opportunities for others to do the same. My standing up that night gave you a chance to respond with generosity. Your offer gave me a chance to prove that community-based approaches work. And now we're creating opportunities for hundreds of other people to transform their lives." Over the following months, Maya's program continued to expand and evolve. She developed partnerships with technical colleges to provide advanced training opportunities, worked with local banks to create financial literacy programs, and collaborated with healthcare organizations to address the medical needs that often prevented people from maintaining steady employment. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had created a model that other cities and organizations began adopting. She was invited to speak at conferences across the country, sharing the lessons she had learned about community-based development. Young professionals from similar backgrounds began reaching out to her for mentorship and advice about careers in social impact work. Maya never forgot the diner where her journey had begun. Once a month, she would return to have coffee with Mrs. and catch up on neighborhood news. Sometimes she would see customers who reminded her of the woman she had been working hard, struggling financially, but maintaining dignity and hope despite difficult circumstances. On one of these visits, Mrs. told her about a young man named David who had been coming to the diner after his shift at a warehouse job. He was studying for his GED in the evenings and talking about his dreams of opening his own auto repair shop someday. Maya asked to meet him, and within a month, David was enrolled in her workforce development program, receiving business training and connecting with local entrepreneurs who could mentor him. Maya realized that her story wasn't unique. There were countless people in every community who had the potential to create positive change if they were given opportunities and support. Her role had become identifying those individuals and creating pathways for them to succeed. A year after that life-changing night at the diner, Maya stood before a gathering of 500 people at the city's annual Community Development Conference. She was being recognized for her innovative work, but as she looked out at the audience, she saw something more important than any individual award. She saw community leaders who had partnered with her programs, business owners who had hired program graduates, former participants who had become mentors for others, and young professionals who had been inspired to pursue careers in social impact work. She saw Officer Torres, who had graduated from his master's program and was now heading a new community policing initiative. She saw her brother, who had graduated debt-free and was working as an engineer while volunteering with youth programs in their old neighborhood. Most importantly, she saw proof that individual acts of courage, when supported by resources and systemic thinking, could create lasting change that extended far beyond any single person or organization. In her acceptance speech, Maya returned to the principle that had guided her from the beginning. We build a better society by ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to contribute their talents and pursue their dreams. Sometimes that starts with someone having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. But real change happens when we create systems and opportunities that allow that courage to multiply and spread. As Maya left the conference that evening, she thought about the journey that had brought her from a late-night shift at a diner to a stage where hundreds of people wanted to hear her ideas about social change. It had all started with a simple decision to help another human being who appeared to be in trouble. She understood now that the moment at the diner hadn't been the end of a story, but the beginning of one. Every day in her work, she saw new opportunities to stand up for justice, to create pathways for others, and to demonstrate that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they were given chances to use their talents and follow their principles. Maya's story had become proof that courage, when combined with opportunity and support, could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And in a world that often seemed dominated by cynicism and division, that was a message of hope that reached far beyond any single program or organization. The young woman who had once worried about making rent was now helping others build the foundations for economic security and community leadership. The waitress who had stood up to police officers was now working with law enforcement agencies to improve community relations. The dropout who had sacrificed her educational dreams for family obligations was now creating educational opportunities for hundreds of others. Maya's transformation was complete, but her work was just beginning. Every day brought new challenges and opportunities to expand the impact of community-based approaches to social problems. And every success story from her programs reminded her that the courage she had found that night at the diner was not unique to her. It existed in countless people throughout every community, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge and create positive change in the world. But Maya had learned something important about herself. When she truly believed in something, She was much stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined and share the most incredible day of her life. This conversation would help her confirm what her heart already knew, that sometimes the biggest risks were also the most important opportunities, and that the courage she had found at the diner was just the beginning of a much larger journey. Officers, I believe there's something you should know before this situation goes any further.